Booking a New York City hotel is a little bit tricky because you don't want to be in a dump, but at the same time, you're probably not going to spend a lot of time in your New York City hotel either, at least if you're having a good time in New York City. So the first thing that I want you to focus on is what location do you want to stay in? New York City is a very, very big place. And if you have looked into all the 5 boroughs, you probably have realized how big New York City is. Most people who are watching this video are probably going to be staying in Manhattan, which is the main borough of New York City. If you think of Times Square, that's where Times Square is. It's in Manhattan. Broadway is in Manhattan. Central Park's in Manhattan. The financial district is in Manhattan. All of these main places are going to be in that borough. So most likely you're going to stay there. Also, some of this advice can apply to all the boroughs as well. Most people who are staying in Manhattan do stay in Midtown. Midtown is where you're going to find Times Square. You're going to find the Theater District. You're going to be right on the southern border of Central Park, because Central Park also stretches into Uptown as well, but it starts in Midtown. This is where a lot of people who are coming to visit New York City end up staying. And I do recommend that if you plan on doing some of those activities that I just mentioned, that you do stay in Midtown, because it's going to make your trip a little bit easier. I definitely don't want you to be afraid of using public transportation and exploring all of Manhattan when you come here. But if you plan on doing a lot of activities around the Theater District, Times Square, Grand Central Station, Central Park, all of those places, then staying in Midtown is probably going to be your best bet. Midtown in Manhattan is actually gigantic. So I'm going to break it down a little bit further in this video. Most of these tourist attractions in Midtown are going to be on the west side of Midtown. The Midtown region of Manhattan is broken up into Midtown West and Midtown East. There are going to be some really great spots to explore on Midtown East, but they're a little bit more low-key and for more local people who are either working or living in New York City. A lot of the main tourist attractions are going to be on the west side of Midtown. So because of that, a lot of people like to stay closer to Midtown West. Midtown West is going to be anywhere west of 5th Avenue. So I want you to keep that in mind. Midtown stretches from the streets of 34th Street all the way to 59th Street. So now you can see how big Midtown actually is. So some people choose to stay downtown if they're coming into New York City, kind of trying to get more of a feel for how a lot of the locals live. So many people live downtown. And there also are tourist attractions downtown as well. If you plan on going to Wall Street or the Seaport District, Battery Park City, all of these gorgeous places in New York City. If you plan on doing the Statue of Liberty ferry, you're going to have to be downtown at some point. You can choose to stay downtown. And I do have to say, there are some great deals in downtown Manhattan. At the same time, if you plan to do those Midtown activities as well, you're going to have to travel up to Midtown as well in either a taxi, Uber, Lyft, or the subway. Now, not as many people stay in Uptown Manhattan. Why is that? One, because there are definitely less hotels there than Midtown and downtown. And the reason why actually is not only just because of tourists like yourself who are coming into New York City, but also because there are less office buildings in Uptown. It's a lot more local. So a lot more people live in Uptown Manhattan. So because of that, with less corporations there, they need less hotels. There's just going to be less options for hotels in Uptown. They do exist, trust me. There's hotels everywhere in New York City, but there's going to be less than in Midtown and downtown Manhattan. But there are some tourist attractions in Uptown Manhattan. All of the National History Museum is going to be in the Upper West Side, and then you're going to have that famous museum mile. All those art museums and those type of exhibits are going to be on the Upper East Side. So you do have a lot of museums to explore in Uptown Manhattan. I do highly recommend that you check them out. A lot of times people decide on where to stay in Manhattan based off price, and rightfully so. New York City hotels are very, very expensive. But I want you to consider the transportation as well. I definitely don't advise to just stay in one area of Manhattan the entire time that you're there, because there's just so much to explore in Manhattan. And if you're here for a good amount of time, at least 4 days or more, you can definitely explore a lot of what Manhattan has to offer. But then you have to also think about, how are you going to get around? Are you comfortable trying to take the subways, or do you know the subways? I have to say that if you are willing to take the subways, Google Maps and apps like that tell you exactly which train lines that you can get on to get to where you need to go, as long as you put in the correct location. There's a time in New York City history where you had to actually look at an old-fashioned map to figure out the subways, and that doesn't exist anymore. Because of the technology, it's actually pretty easy to get around on the subways nowadays, even for people who don't know exactly where they're going. Because let me tell you, the New York City subways can be very, very confusing, but apps like Google Maps have helped so much, even for locals sometimes. You can always get anywhere you want to go in New York City in an Uber, Lyft, or taxi. The thing to consider is that it is very, very expensive to get a car in New York City. I have to say, taxis are going to be the cheaper option. Taxis can even be expensive too, depending on where you want to go. If you want to go from Uptown Manhattan to downtown Manhattan, you're going to pay lots and lots of money, especially if it's in a peak hour, or if it's raining out, then you're going to pay even more. I want you to think about where you're going to go when you're going to be in Manhattan or New York City as a whole. Think about, are you going to want to go to Brooklyn? Are you going to want to go to downtown Manhattan? Are you going to be in Midtown pretty much the entire time? Or do you want to explore the Upper East and Upper West Side as well? These are all things to consider when making your decision on which location to pick for your hotel. It's very, very hard in Manhattan or New York City as a whole to walk everywhere that you're trying to go. The only way that you can really get away with this is if you pick a hotel in the theater district or in Times Square and you plan on doing your entire trip really in that region of New York City. Then you can get away with it. If you're doing a 4-night trip or more, you're not going to want to stay in the theater district or Times Square the entire time, and you're going to want to explore other areas of New York City. Because of that, I wouldn't recommend relying on just walking the entire time. You're going to have to rely on some other form of transportation as well. So I want you to factor in what the cost of that is going to be. And I do have to say, taking a subway is going to be way cheaper than taking a car everywhere you want to go. Another thing I want you to pay attention to is parking prices depending on where you're going to go. And this applies only if you're bringing in a car or renting a car in New York City. If you're coming into New York City and wondering if you should rent a car, I definitely don't advise it because you're not going to need it, especially if you're going to be in Manhattan most of the time. If you are bringing in a car, so if you're traveling from somewhere a little bit more local, you're going to need to consider where you're going to park the car as well. New York City hotels are a little bit different. They don't all have garages in their buildings. Most hotels are right next to a garage or do have a garage in the building, but sometimes the rates are so ridiculous that you might not even want to park in that garage and you might want to park in another garage nearby. Not only do you have to look at the rates for the hotels, but you're also going to have to look at the actual parking rates nearby to where you want to be because they can vary greatly. One app I love to use with my car in New York City is Spot Hero. That app has discounted rates and you can reserve parking spots in advance, so I highly recommend that app. So another thing to keep in mind is that hotel rooms in New York City are very small. They're almost like micro rooms compared to other hotel rooms around the world. So I don't want you to come into New York City thinking that you're going to have this big grand hotel room with a lot of space. Even some of the nicest hotels in the city are just very small. When you come to New York City, you're not going to be spending a lot of time in your hotel room anyway, so it really doesn't matter. I would just say that keep that in mind when packing and when deciding who's going to stay in your hotel room because it can be very tight. Another thing to note is that sometimes there are extra fees and charges that apply to New York City hotels that don't exist in other places. There's something called a city fee that is just an extra charge. So many people have fought and complained about these fees in New York City, but it's something that I want you to be aware of. I want you, when booking a hotel, to know upfront all the fees that are going to take place because I can't even tell you how many people go to pay and check out for their hotel room and then they realize that there are so many extra fees that they just didn't know about. Try to figure that out with the hotel that you're going to pick in advance. And don't be afraid to ask about those fees up front. Another thing that might affect your stay in New York City is construction. And you might be thinking, okay, Lauren, what the heck does construction have to do with a New York City hotel? There's always construction going on in New York City. A lot of times, New York City buildings, the actual skyscrapers in New York City, people are actually working on the facades of those buildings. Sometimes you might get a really good rate in a New York City hotel and wonder, why did I get such a good rate? It might be because the actual window of your hotel room might be blocked by scaffolding in New York City because there might actually be construction going on. You might be getting a good rate because you're not going to have a view at all in New York City. I've stayed in lots of New York City hotel rooms. I want to say almost every single time, I pretty much didn't have a view in New York City because I just didn't care enough to try to pay all this extra money for a view. I do advise that if you're trying to save money, don't try to splurge for this crazy view in New York City in your hotel room. You can always go to rooftops and observation decks in New York City with amazing views of New York City. Don't worry. You will get your New York City views in. You just don't need it in your hotel room because, like I always say, you're not going to spend a lot of time there. Another thing to consider too is there are also New York City hotel rooms where you might get an interior room, or you might have a window to the outside, but the window might be looking at directly another building. So you're getting literally no view and no sunlight. These are very common in New York City. I've stayed in hotel rooms that have had this exact scenario, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. If a hotel in New York City is ridiculously cheap, I'm talking about like you feel like you're getting an absolute steal, I would say, unless you know exactly why you're getting that deal, do not book that hotel room. There could be so many different reasons why. It might be because there's things going on in the neighborhood that other people don't like and they don't want to stay there. It might be because of construction or something going on in the building. It might be just because of the bad reviews going on in that hotel building or a change in management. That happens all the time in New York City hotels. If you're seeing a ridiculously low price that seems too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. What's the cheapest day of the week to stay in New York City? Sunday is going to be the cheapest and Monday is going to be the most expensive. That's a little bit of a catch-22 scenario, especially if you're trying to stay for multiple days. Why is that? Because most people who are coming in to travel for business are probably going to be coming in on Monday. The exact opposite is happening on Sunday where they're probably leaving, so you have that little gap of time. If you're staying from Sunday into Monday and then beyond that, you might be able to make up a little bit of the price difference there, but that's going to be the most most expensive day and the least expensive day of the week. One app I love to use when booking hotels in New York City is Hotel Tonight. This doesn't just exist in New York City. This exists in, I believe, the whole world at this point. It's a great app, and you can find last minute deals and also some deals if you're booking a little bit further in advance as well. So definitely check out this app. But I do also have to say, sometimes you might want to look at hotel sites directly. So if you know exactly which hotel that you're interested in, or have narrowed down, say, a list of maybe like 10 hotels that fit what you're looking for in the area, you might want to go directly to their site because they might have even better rates there because you're booking through them directly and they don't have to pay a fee to a website like Hotel Tonight or Expedia or something like that. Always check refund policies and cancellations as well, just because you never know. Some hotels are a little bit more strict on this than others, and you might not be able to get your money back, but I want you to at least know that in advance so you can plan your trip accordingly. Things do always happen, so I always like to say, try to see if there's any type of refund policy or cancellation policy, but at least be aware of that before booking so you know exactly what you're getting into. One other thing to know, you can't rely on Airbnbs in New York City. Why is that? So Airbnb actually is not really technically legal in New York City. Now you might be thinking, wait a second, Lauren, I'm on Airbnb all the time and I see places in New York City. Why is that? That's because two things. Airbnb is legal if you are staying in an apartment with somebody who lives there. So say you are staying in an extra bedroom in my apartment, that is legal on Airbnb in New York City. What is not legal? If I rented out my apartment and I was not physically in the unit and I said, you can stay in my apartment 4 nights, 5 nights, that is not legal. This has been very controversial in New York City, and there's been so many battles between Airbnb and New York City with this because it's really kind of limited the options that tourists have in New York City. And of course, it drives the prices of hotels up as well. So no wonder why New York City doesn't want to make this legal. There are people on Airbnb that illegally rent out their New York City apartment. And that's why you do see some apartments on there where the whole apartment is available and they're illegally doing this. That's why you will see those on Airbnb. But technically, it's not really legal. There's no repercussions for you as a guest staying there, only for the owner who is renting out their apartment. It's just something that you should be aware of. There's just a lot of legalities with Airbnb in New York City, and unfortunately, even when I'm booking a hotel, it's just not something I rely on in New York City. One other quick bonus tip, there's actually something called Hotel Week in New York City. What is this? It's similar to like a restaurant week where they offer discounted hotel rates in New York City. Now it's in January every year, and that's because they definitely want to boost tourism in January when a lot of people don't want to go to New York City. I do have to say though, going to New York City in the winter, there's a lot of fun things to do in New York City because a lot of the main attractions in New York City take place inside. There are, of course, some beautiful attractions that people should enjoy outside in New York City in the warmer months, but there's plenty to do in the winter. So if you want a cheaper trip to New York City, don't be afraid to take advantage of those Hotel Week deals in January. I hope this helped you figure out how to book a hotel in New York City. Now, if you guys have any questions at all about booking a hotel in New York City, feel free to reach out to me or leave a comment.